My mom kicked me out at 18 for being a failure. A decade later she was begging for my help. I still remember the sound of my mother's voice that October morning in 2013. It wasn't the words themselves that cut through me like a knife. It was the coldness, the finality in her tone. I was 18 years old, sitting at our kitchen table in our small ranch house in Columbus, Ohio, staring at my rejection letter from Ohio State University. It was the third college rejection that month, and my mother stood in the doorway with her arms crossed, her face twisted into an expression I had seen too many times before: disappointment. "You're a failure, Marcus," she said, her words hanging in the autumn air like frost. "I didn't raise you to be lazy and worthless. I've given you everything, and this is what I get in return? Bad grades, no ambition, no future." I wanted to defend myself. I wanted to tell her about the part-time job I had been working at the grocery store, about how I had been staying up late trying to study despite having undiagnosed ADHD that made focusing feel like trying to hold water in my hands. I wanted to explain that I wasn't lazy. I was struggling, drowning in a system that didn't understand me. But the words caught in my throat because deep down a part of me believed her. Maybe I was a failure. Maybe I wasn't good enough. The house felt smaller that day, suffocating. The beige walls of our living room seemed to close in on me as my mother continued her tirade. She spoke about sacrifice, about how she had worked double shifts as a nurse to put food on the table after my father left when I was 7. She reminded me of every mistake I had made, every B- on a report card, every time I had disappointed her. The October sunlight filtered through the kitchen window, casting long shadows across the linoleum floor, and I felt like one of those shadows, barely there, easily overlooked. "I want you out," she finally said, her voice dropping to a whisper that somehow felt louder than shouting. "Pack your things. You have until tomorrow morning." I spent that night in my childhood bedroom surrounded by posters of basketball players and old comic books, wondering how my life had arrived at this moment. The room that had once felt like a sanctuary now felt like a prison cell. I could hear my mother moving around downstairs, the familiar creaking of the floorboards, the sound of the television playing some late-night show. Everything was normal for her while my entire world was collapsing. The next morning arrived too quickly. The sky was overcast, gray clouds hanging low over the neighborhood like a blanket of uncertainty. I packed my belongings into 2 duffel bags and a backpack. Everything I owned in the world fit into 3 pieces of luggage. My mother didn't come out of her bedroom to say goodbye. I stood in the hallway outside her door for 5 minutes, waiting, hoping she would change her mind, that she would open the door and tell me she was sorry, that we could work through this together. But the door remained closed and the silence was deafening. I walked out of that house with $73 in my wallet, no college degree, no plan, and nowhere to go. The autumn wind bit at my face as I stood on the sidewalk, looking back at the only home I had ever known. The house looked the same as it always had, modest, with its fading blue paint and the old maple tree in the front yard losing its leaves. But it was no longer my home. I was on my own now, and the weight of that realization pressed down on my shoulders like a physical thing. My first night alone, I slept in my car, a beat-up 1998 Honda Civic that barely ran. I had parked it behind a 24-hour diner on the east side of Columbus, hoping no one would bother me. The seats were uncomfortable, and the October cold seeped through the doors despite the blanket I had wrapped around myself. I lay there in the darkness, listening to the sound of traffic passing by on the street, and I cried. Not because I was scared of being homeless, but because the person who was supposed to love me unconditionally had given up on me. The days that followed were a blur of survival. I continued working at the grocery store, but my paychecks barely covered food, let alone rent. I spent my nights in that car, parked in different locations around the city to avoid suspicion. I showered at a local gym where I had managed to get a discounted membership. I ate dollar menu items from fast food restaurants and learned to stretch a single meal across an entire day. Columbus felt different from the outside looking in. The city that had once been my home now felt like a maze of strangers and closed doors. But something inside me began to change during those difficult weeks. The anger I felt toward my mother slowly transformed into determination. I refused to let her words define me. I refused to be the failure she had labeled me. Every morning as I washed my face in the gym bathroom, I looked at myself in the mirror and made a promise. I would prove her wrong. I would build something from nothing. I would succeed not because of her but in spite of her. The winter of 2013 hit Columbus hard. By December, temperatures were regularly dropping below freezing, and sleeping in my car became not just uncomfortable but genuinely dangerous. I remember waking up one morning with frost on the inside of my windows, my breath visible in the air, my fingers so numb I could barely grip the steering wheel. That was the morning I knew something had to change. I couldn't survive another month like this. I had been working at the grocery store for nearly 2 months since my mother kicked me out, but the money wasn't enough. After gas, food, and my gym membership, I had almost nothing left. I started looking for additional work, anything that would get me off the streets. I applied to restaurants, retail stores, warehouses, anywhere that was hiring. Most places took one look at my situation and turned me away. How could I list a permanent address when I was living in my car? How could I present myself professionally when I was showering in a gym locker room? But persistence, I learned, is a currency all its own. In early January 2014, I landed a second job at a 24-hour gas station on the night shift. The pay was minimum wage, but it came with an unexpected blessing: warmth. From 11 at night until 7 in the morning, I had a heated building to stay in, a bathroom, and access to food. The manager, a middle-aged man named Carl with graying hair and kind eyes, seemed to understand my situation without me having to explain it. He never asked why I sometimes looked exhausted or why I was always the first to volunteer for extra shifts. Working 2 jobs meant I was sleeping only 3 to 4 hours a day, usually in my car during the afternoon when the sun provided some warmth. My body ached constantly, and there were moments when I felt like I was running on nothing but willpower and cheap coffee. But I was saving money. Every paycheck I set aside whatever I could, storing cash in an envelope hidden under my car seat. By March I had saved nearly $800, enough for a security deposit on a room. I found a place through a Craigslist ad, a basement room in a house shared by 3 other people in a rough neighborhood on the south side of Columbus. The room was barely large enough for a twin mattress and a small dresser. The ceiling was low with exposed pipes running across it. The single window was at ground level, offering a view of people's feet as they walked by on the sidewalk. But it was mine. It had a door that locked, heat that worked, and a roof that didn't leak. On the day I moved in with my 3 duffel bags, I sat on that bare mattress and felt something I hadn't felt in months. Hope. Having a stable place to live changed everything. I could shower in my own bathroom, cook simple meals in the shared kitchen, and most importantly, I could sleep without worrying about being woken up by police tapping on my car window. My mind, which had been consumed by the daily struggle of survival, now had space to think about the future. And I kept thinking about my mother's words: "You're a failure." I wanted to prove her wrong, but I didn't know how. The answer came from an unexpected place. Carl, my manager at the gas station, noticed that I had been teaching myself computer programming during slow nights at work. I had found free coding tutorials online and had been working through them on the store's computer between customers. One night in April, he sat down next to me during my break and told me about his nephew who worked in tech in San Francisco. "There's good money in that," he said, gesturing at the screen. "And you don't need a fancy degree to do it. You just need to be good at it." That conversation planted a seed. I started dedicating every spare moment to learning programming. I checked out books from the public library about web development, watched countless YouTube tutorials, and practiced coding exercises until my eyes burned. The Columbus Public Library became my second home. It was free, it was warm, and it had fast internet. I spent entire days there on my days off, sitting at the same desk by the window teaching myself HTML, CSS, JavaScript, and eventually more complex languages. Months passed. Spring turned to summer and summer faded into fall. By October 2014, exactly 1 year after my mother had kicked me out, I had built my first website. It was simple, a portfolio site to showcase the small projects I had created, but I was proud of it. I applied to dozens of junior developer positions, knowing I was underqualified, knowing most companies wanted someone with a degree or professional experience. I received rejection after rejection, but I kept applying. In December 2014, I got my first break. A small startup in Columbus needed a junior web developer, and they were willing to take a chance on someone self-taught. The interview was terrifying. I sat across from the founders in their cramped office above a coffee shop, trying to explain my code while fighting off imposter syndrome. But something I said must have resonated because 3 days later they offered me the position. The salary was $35,000 a year, more money than I had ever imagined making. I quit both my other jobs and threw myself into this new opportunity. I was the first person in the office every morning and the last to leave at night. I volunteered for every project, no matter how challenging or tedious. I learned from my mistakes, asked questions constantly, and gradually I became good at what I did. Really good. The code that had once seemed like an incomprehensible foreign language now flowed from my fingers naturally, like music. 2 years later, in 2016, I was recruited by a larger tech company in Columbus with a salary of $65,000. By 2018, I had moved to a senior developer position at a major corporation making 6 figures. By 2020, I had been promoted to lead developer, managing a team of 12 people. The kid who had been kicked out of his home for being a failure was now leading projects worth millions of dollars, speaking at tech conferences, and building a reputation in the industry. I bought my first house in 2019, A small two-bedroom place in a quiet neighborhood in the suburbs of Columbus. The day I signed the papers, I sat in the empty living room on the hardwood floor and thought about that basement room I had rented years earlier, about sleeping in my car, about those cold October nights when I had nothing. I had built this life from scratch with no help, no safety net, no support from the person who should have believed in me most. And in that moment, sitting in my own home that I had paid for with my own hard work, I felt both pride and a deep aching sadness. I hadn't spoken to my mother in nearly a decade. Not a single phone call, text message, or email. I had thought about reaching out over the years, imagined what I might say to her, but I never did. Part of me wanted her to see what I had become, to know that she had been wrong about me. But another part of me, the part that still carried the wound of her rejection, didn't want to give her the satisfaction of knowing I still cared what she thought. Life settled into a comfortable rhythm by 2023. I was 38 years old, working as a director of engineering at a Fortune 500 company based in Columbus, managing multiple development teams and overseeing projects that reached millions of users. My salary had grown to a number I once couldn't have imagined, nearly $200,000 a year. I had invested wisely, saved aggressively, and built a life that felt secure and meaningful. I had also learned to fill the void left by my fractured family. I had friends, real friends who felt like chosen family. My colleague Jennifer and her husband hosted me for Thanksgiving every year. My neighbor Tom and I grabbed beers on Friday evenings and talked about everything from technology to philosophy. I had built relationships based on mutual respect and genuine connection, something I realized I had never truly had with my mother even before she kicked me out. The call came on a Tuesday evening in September 2023. I was sitting in my home office, reviewing code for an upcoming product launch, when my phone buzzed with a number I didn't recognize. Ohio area code, Columbus Exchange. I almost let it go to voicemail. I had trained myself to ignore unknown numbers, but something made me answer. Hello. There was a pause, then a voice I hadn't heard in 10 years. Marcus? It's your mom. My hand tightened around the phone. My heart began to race, that old familiar anxiety flooding back as if no time had passed at all. For a moment I couldn't speak. The silence stretched between us, heavy with a decade of unspoken words. I know you probably don't want to hear from me, she continued, her voice shaking slightly. I know I have no right to call you after everything. But I didn't know who else to turn to. I remained silent, waiting. Part of me wanted to hang up immediately, to protect myself from whatever pain this conversation might bring. But another part of me, perhaps the part that had never stopped being that 18-year-old kid who just wanted his mother's approval, needed to hear what she had to say. I'm in trouble, Marcus. Real trouble. Her voice cracked and I could hear her crying softly. I lost my job at the hospital 6 months ago. They downsized, let go of a bunch of senior nurses. I've been looking for work, but at 62 nobody wants to hire me. I've burned through my savings. I'm 3 months behind on my mortgage. The bank is threatening foreclosure. I'm going to lose the house. The house. The same house she had kicked me out of a decade ago. The same house where I had spent that last night in my childhood bedroom, packing my life into duffel bags while she refused to come out and face me. I felt a complex mixture of emotions. Anger, sadness, a strange sense of vindication, and underneath it all, an unexpected surge of compassion that surprised me. I've tried everything, she continued, her words coming faster now, desperate. I've applied for assistance programs, talked to the bank about refinancing, even looked into bankruptcy. Nothing is working. I'm going to be on the street, Marcus. I'm going to lose everything. She paused, and when she spoke again, her voice was barely a whisper. I know I don't deserve to ask you for anything. I know what I did to you is unforgivable. But you're the only family I have left. Please, I'm begging you. I need help. I sat there in my office chair staring at the framed photograph on my desk. A picture of me receiving an award at a tech conference, shaking hands with the CEO of my company. 10 years ago I had been homeless, sleeping in my car, wondering if I would survive the winter. Now I had more money than I knew what to do with, and the woman who had called me a failure was begging me for help. The irony wasn't lost on me. This was supposed to be the moment of triumph, wasn't it? The moment where I could tell her exactly what I thought of her, where I could throw her words back in her face and let her feel the rejection she had made me feel. Remember when you called me a failure? I could say. Remember when you kicked me out with nothing? How does it feel to be on the other side? But as I sat there listening to her cry, I realized that revenge felt hollow. Making her suffer wouldn't undo the pain she had caused me. It wouldn't heal the wounds or give me back those years of struggle. It would just create more pain, more brokenness in a world that already had too much of both. How much do you need? I asked quietly. The question seemed to surprise her. She went silent for a moment, then said, the back payments on the mortgage. It's about $18,000. I know that's a lot of money. I don't expect you to. I'll take care of it, I interrupted. Give me the account information and I'll pay it off tomorrow. Marcus sighed. I don't know what to say. Thank you. Thank you so much. I'll pay you back, I promise. Once I find work. You don't have to pay me back, I said. Consider it a gift. But I need you to understand something. I paused, choosing my words carefully. This doesn't erase what happened between us. It doesn't mean everything is suddenly okay. You hurt me deeply and that's something I'm still working through. But you're right about one thing, we're family. And I refuse to let you end up on the street regardless of our history. She was crying openly now and through her tears she managed to say, I was wrong about you, Marcus. I was so wrong. You're not a failure. You never were. I was the failure, as a mother, as a person. I let my own fears and disappointments poison how I treated you. I'm so sorry. I'm so sorry. Those words I had waited a decade to hear, should have felt satisfying. But instead they just felt sad. An apology couldn't undo the past or rebuild trust that had been shattered so completely. But it was a start, perhaps the first honest thing she had said to me in years. We talked for another hour that night. She told me about her struggles since I had left, about how she had spent years in denial about her own role in our fractured relationship, about how she had finally gone to therapy and begun to confront the ways her own childhood trauma had shaped how she treated me. She asked about my life and I found myself sharing carefully edited versions of my journey. The successes but not the depths of the suffering, the achievements but not the lonely nights when I had questioned whether any of it was worth it. When we finally hung up, I sat in the silence of my office for a long time. The September evening had deepened into night, and through my window, I could see the lights of the city twinkling in the distance. I thought about the 18-year-old version of myself, scared and alone, sleeping in his car behind a diner. If I could go back and tell him what the future held, the success, the stability, and yes, even this moment of painful reconciliation, would he have believed me? The next morning I transferred the money to pay off her mortgage. I also set up a monthly payment to cover her basic expenses until she could get back on her feet. It was a significant amount of money, but I had it to give, and withholding it out of spite would have made me the kind of person I never wanted to become. But I wasn't ready to see her yet. That would take more time, more healing, more work on both our parts. For now, this was enough. Helping her from a distance, proving to myself that I could be better than the hurt that had been done to me. The months following that phone call were strange and complicated. My mother and I maintained contact, but it was cautious, measured, like two people learning to navigate a relationship that had been broken and was now being carefully rebuilt from fragments. We spoke on the phone every few weeks, conversations that started awkward and stilted but gradually became more natural. She told me she had found part-time work at a clinic, enough to cover her bills now that the mortgage crisis had been resolved. I told her about my work, about the projects I was leading, about the life I had built. But there was an elephant in the room that neither of us seemed ready to address directly. Would we ever see each other face to face again? The question hung unspoken between us during every conversation, and I wasn't sure what the answer was. Part of me wanted to keep things exactly as they were, helping her financially but maintaining emotional distance, a safe buffer that protected me from being hurt again. But another part of me recognized that this halfway relationship was a kind of limbo, neither fully estranged nor truly reconciled. The decision came in December 2023, just before the holidays. My mother called me on a Saturday afternoon, and after our usual pleasantries she said something that caught me off guard. I've been going to therapy regularly, she told me. Working through a lot of things about my own childhood, about how my parents treated me, about the patterns I repeated with you. My therapist suggested that if you were willing and only if you're comfortable, it might be helpful for us to have a session together. No pressure, Marcus. I want to do the work to make things right if that's even possible. I thought about it for days. The idea of sitting in a room with my mother and a therapist, unpacking decades of pain and resentment, felt overwhelming. But I also recognized that what we had now, this surface-level reconciliation, wasn't enough for either of us. If we were going to have any kind of real relationship, we needed to confront the past honestly and completely. In January 2024, I agreed. We met at a therapist's office in Columbus on a cold Wednesday afternoon. It was the first time I had seen my mother in over 10 years, and the sight of her shocked me. She had aged in ways I hadn't expected. Her hair, which had been dark brown with only hints of gray, was now almost entirely white. She looked smaller somehow, more fragile, the years of stress and struggle evident in the lines of her face. When our eyes met in the waiting room, I saw something I had never seen before. Genuine remorse mixed with fear that I might reject her. The therapy session was one of the hardest things I had ever done. We sat across from each other in comfortable chairs while the therapist, a woman named Dr. Patterson with kind eyes and a calm presence, guided our conversation. My mother talked about her own childhood, about growing up with an alcoholic father who was verbally abusive, about learning that love was conditional and had to be earned through achievement. She talked about her fear when my father left, about feeling like a failure as a wife and terrified that she would fail as a mother too. I projected all of my fears onto you, she said, her voice breaking. When you struggled in school, when you didn't get into college, I saw it as proof that I had failed. And instead of supporting you, instead of trying to understand what you were going through, I lashed out. I convinced myself that tough love was what you needed, that pushing you out would force you to grow up. But the truth is, I was just repeating what my father did to me. I was perpetuating the same cycle of conditional love and rejection that had hurt me so deeply. Hearing her explain it didn't make the pain go away, but it added context that I had never had before. It helped me understand that her actions, while inexcusable, came from a place of her own brokenness rather than from a lack of love for me. Understanding didn't equal forgiveness, not yet, but it was a step toward it. I shared my own story that day, parts of it I had never told anyone. I talked about sleeping in my car during that brutal winter, about the nights I went to bed hungry, about the shame I felt when I showed up to job interviews wearing the same clothes I had slept in. I talked about the years of therapy I had gone through to deal with the abandonment issues and the imposter syndrome that had plagued me even as I achieved success. I needed her to understand the full weight of what her actions had cost me. I want you to know that I've forgiven you, I said finally, the words surprising even me as they came out. Not because what you did was okay and not because the hurt has disappeared, but because carrying this anger around for the rest of my life doesn't serve me. It doesn't make me happy or successful or whole. It just keeps me chained to that moment on your doorstep 10 years ago, and I refuse to live there anymore. My mother wept openly, and for the first time in my life I felt comfortable enough to reach across and hold her hand. It was a small gesture, but it felt monumental. A physical connection that represented the emotional bridge we were attempting to build. The months that followed brought gradual healing. We started meeting for lunch once a month, neutral territory where we could continue the difficult work of rebuilding our relationship. We talked about the past, yes, but we also started creating new memories. He came to my house for dinner and met my friends. I helped her set up her computer and taught her how to video chat. We found small ways to be present in each other's lives without erasing the history between us. By the spring of 2024, something had shifted. I realized that the narrative I had carried for so long, the story of the mother who rejected her son and the son who succeeded despite her, was no longer serving me. The truth was more complicated and more human than that simple story allowed. She had hurt me deeply. Yes, I had built my success without her support. But we were also two imperfect people trying to break generational cycles of pain and do better than what had been done to us. I thought often about that 18-year-old kid I had been, standing on the sidewalk with his duffel bags, watching his childhood home disappear behind him. If I could go back and tell him anything, I would tell him this. The pain you're feeling right now is real and valid, and it will shape you in ways both difficult and beautiful. You will spend years angry and hurt, and that's okay. But one day you will have the strength to choose forgiveness, not for her sake but for your own. You will realize that holding on to resentment is like drinking poison and expecting the other person to die. You will learn that forgiveness doesn't mean forgetting or excusing. It means releasing yourself from the prison of bitterness. My mother will never be perfect. Our relationship will never look like the idealized mother-son bonds I see in movies or read about in books. There will always be a scar where the wound once was, a reminder of what was broken. But scars are also proof of healing. Evidence that the body has done the remarkable work of repairing itself. And in our own imperfect way we are healing. As I write this now, sitting in my home office with the autumn sun streaming through the windows, I'm struck by how much has changed in 11 years. The boy who was kicked out for being a failure became a man who learned that success isn't measured by your bank account or your job title. It's measured by your capacity to grow, to forgive, to break cycles, and to choose compassion even when you have every right to choose anger. My mother called me yesterday to tell me she had been hired for a full-time nursing position at a senior care facility. The pride in her voice was unmistakable, and I found myself genuinely happy for her. I've been telling everyone at work about my son, she said. About how successful you are, about how proud I am of you. I know I don't say it enough, but Marcus, you are the strongest, most resilient person I know. And I'm sorry it took me so long to see it. I thanked her, and after we hung up, I sat with those words for a while. The validation I had craved at 18, the acknowledgement that I was worthy, that I was enough, had finally come. But the remarkable thing was that I didn't need it anymore. Somewhere along the journey, I had learned to validate myself, to know my own worth independent of anyone else's recognition. That's perhaps the most important lesson I've learned from this entire experience. You cannot wait for the people who hurt you to give you permission to heal. You cannot put your life on hold hoping they will finally see your value. You have to do the work yourself, build yourself up from nothing, and create a life that feels meaningful and authentic to you. And if years later reconciliation becomes possible, that's a bonus. But it can never be the foundation of your self-worth. The house I own now is just a few miles from the house I grew up in, but the distance between them represents an entire lifetime of growth. Sometimes I drive past the old neighborhood and look at that ranch house with its fading blue paint and the maple tree in the front yard. It looks smaller than I remember, more ordinary. It's just a house now, not a symbol of rejection or failure. Just a place where part of my story began but not where it ended. My story isn't about revenge or proving people wrong. It's about resilience, about the human capacity to endure unimaginable hardship and come out the other side not just surviving but thriving. It's about breaking cycles of pain and choosing to be better than what was done to you. It's about the long, difficult journey toward forgiveness, both of others and of yourself. I am no longer the boy my mother kicked out. I am no longer defined by her words or her rejection. I am Marcus, a man who built himself from nothing, who learned that failure is not a permanent state but a temporary setback, who discovered that success is not about impressing the people who doubted you but about creating a life that feels true to who you are. And if my story can offer hope to anyone else who has been called a failure, who has been rejected by the people who should have loved them, who has felt the crushing weight of starting over with nothing, let it be this. You are so much more than what anyone says you are. Your worth is not determined by the people who cannot see it. You have within you the strength to build something beautiful from the ruins of rejection. It will be harder than you can imagine, but you are capable of more than you know. The decade that turned my mother's harsh judgment into a humbling plea for assistance taught me the most valuable lesson of all. The best revenge is not making someone regret what they did to you. It's becoming someone you're proud to be, regardless of their opinion. It's building a life so full of purpose and meaning that their validation becomes irrelevant. It's learning to forgive not because they deserve it, but because you deserve the freedom that comes with letting go. This is my story. This is how I learned that being kicked out was not the end of my life. It was the beginning of discovering who I truly was and who I was capable of becoming.